No. And guess what? We're on the air, live.
All
Welcome,
right.
welcome to the Pop Cult Online Power Hour. This is the fun-sized edition. It's a little short one, but it's going to be just as fun as a regular size. And with me, as always, my partner in crime, Mr. Bob Breetall. Say hello, Bob.
Hey, Rick.
So, anything interesting happened to you in the last couple of days?
Let's see if you can see that right there.
Ah, I'm familiar with that book. What about it?
60th anniversary edition of the Guinness World Record book. Let's see if that gentleman there looks familiar to anybody.
Hey, he looks vaguely familiar.
So, page 172, largest comic book collection. Bob Breetall, USA, has amassed a collection of 94,268 comic books. The tally was made at his home in Mission Viejo, California, USA, on May 1st, 2014, and includes only unique comic books. Breetall began collecting comics when he was 8 years old, when he purchased Amazing Spider-Man number 88. And a quick fact, Bob's collection weighs an estimated 16,800 pounds, about the same as 118 adult men.
Wow.
Fortunately, I don't need to carry it around.
Let
It
me
is indeed a lot of stuff.
let me throw out the first question. Do you still have that first issue that you read?
I do not. I will be honest. We've talked about it maybe before, but when I read my old Spider-Man comics, I was 8, right? And I read them and read them and read them, and I actually, you remember color forms?
Oh yeah, sticks like magic.
Right. So in addition to color forms, because they were 2D little dudes, and you'd kind of play them around on the background. So I would cut up my Spider-Man comics to get the Spider-Man figures and the bad guys, and I just kind of play with, because there were no action figures, really. I mean, there were some Migos, but I didn't have those. And I would play action figures. So like my first probably 10 issues of Spider-Man were all chopped up. So in later years, a few years later, when I kind of like, what was I doing? I rebought those issues. So, I mean, I have Spider-Man 88 that I probably bought in 1974 or 1975 when I was 10 or 11. When I had some sense when I was the ripe old age of 11 in double digits. It's like, fool, what are you doing cutting up your comic books? So, I had to replace those. But I loved them so much, right? And you read them time and again.
Yeah.
So, the record is for unique comic books. So I'll talk a little bit about, there was no world's largest comic book collection record in the Guinness book until I proposed the category to them. So the genesis of it was I saw something on a website, or actually on a forum that I was on online, that was talking about this guy down in Australia who had the world record largest comic book collection. I was like, that's cool, let me go look. And in fact, there he was. He was certified through the Australian World Record Academy, and his total, I forget exactly, it was something like 65,000 comics. And I'm like, I think I've got more than 65,000 comics. I've never heard of this World Record Academy. I wonder how much the Guinness record is for it. Because, when you think of a world record, you think of Guinness, right? I mean, that's the go-to world record thing. So I go to Guinness, and there was no record. So I went on their inquiry page, and I sent in an inquiry, and they're like, well, how, what do you have? And they're like, oh, we don't have that category. They replied to me a few weeks later. You can, submit your bid for that, and here's all the rules. Well, were there some rules? It's like, and they had definition for what counts as a comic book. It has to be sequential storytelling. So for that, I didn't count any of my official handbook of the Marvel Universe, or, the swimsuit pinup issue, or whatever poster magazines. I didn't count my Wizard magazines or Amazing Heroes or, comics buyer's guides or any of these other things. So right off the top, I had to take several thousand items off the top of my collection that just don't fall in the category of comic book. And then they said also, well, you can't count duplicate comics. Well, I don't typically, but at some point, I guess I just accidentally buy duplicates of comics, or at some point back when I was in my teens and I thought that I was going to get rich off of buying Dazzler #1 or, X-Men #1 that had 20 covers by Jim Lee or I'm exaggerating, 5 interlocking covers. I had like multiples of those issues. And fortunately, I have all my comics in a database. I use ComicBase. So I was able to run a tally on the database, and I was able to look at the quantity. So any place that there was a quantity greater than 1, I did an export of the database into an Excel spreadsheet, and then I did a count of the rows instead of a tally of the quantity. And that told me how many unique different things I had, and it weeded out all the duplicates in the collection. And I had thousands of duplicate comic books. I'm like, man, I have all these, so I originally thought, oh, this guy has 65,000. I've got over 100,000 easy. Mm-hmm. And it turned out after I weeded out all the stuff that wasn't comics and I weeded out all the duplicates, I was down to like 89,000. And I'm like, dope, So there was like 10,000 comics right off the top, from all that. So I said, well, anyway, it's bigger than 65,000. So I went ahead with the record, and I needed to have independent verifications of people in the industry. There's a guy named Michael Hammersky who runs a comics website and sells comics, and he also used to be a forensic accountant and did audits. So he was approved by Guinness to be one of the guys to verify my collection. And then Matt Powers, who's the owner of the local shop I go to most, Comics, Tunes, and Toys in Tustin, California. He's run that shop for 20 years. He was my second, kind of official auditor. And then you have to have a public event, right, where you do the count and verify the count. And we didn't count every single one, but I'll talk about that in a minute. So anyway, that year I went to the Long Beach Comic Expo and I did a talk on building your comic collection, and I handed out flyers at that saying, hey, I'm going to have this event down in Mission Viejo, come on by and I'll have free pizza, free comics, all this. So on a day in May of 2013, it was last year, I had this event. And I actually gave away at that event, I took all those duplicate comics I was telling you about. I had like 6 long boxes out in my garage that day when, probably about 75 to 100 people came to this thing, which is pretty good. Pizza, cookies, soft drinks, all kind of stuff for people who came. But I also let them say, hey, take whatever free comics you want out of these boxes. I'm not selling them. My gift to you for coming out and sharing the day with me. So I probably gave away, what is there, about 300 comics. I didn't have them bagged and boarded. So I took them out of the bags and boards. So out of 6 long boxes, that had to have been well over 1,000 comic books, probably more like 1,800 comic books. I gave away the majority of those comic books on that day. And I've subsequently given away a lot of other comics. I've found like charities that are on my website, comicspectrum.com. I have a page for charities. There are charities that take comic books and they give them to children's hospitals, or they take comic books that are worth a little more, they sell them, and then they donate that money. There's like there's a Warrior Project where you donate them to service people overseas. And I have packaged these comics up and sent them into these various places, and just kind of I've divested myself of most of them. And then some of the ones I did some contests on Comic Spectrum and gave them away to people who kind of entered into those contests and stuff. Anyway, so I had the thing. I got the Guinness record, 89,000 and some comics, and then they told me, oh, well, wait a minute. We want to see, because not every record gets actually published in the book. Some they just, okay, here's your certificate, go on, be on your way. For mine, they thought it was interesting enough, but they were finalizing the 2014 book at that point. So they're like, well, don't tell anybody about this, because the second you tell someone, there's going to be all these people coming out of the woodwork saying, I have more comics than that, which I can see because that's what I did to this poor guy in Australia, right? So they're saying, keep it under your hat. There it is. And we'll send out a crew and everything. So they sent out a photo crew in October of last year, and we took the pictures and everything, and then they interviewed me and said, okay, we'll put it in the book, and it'll be in next year's book. But still, don't talk about it until the book comes. So I'm like, nah, I'm sitting on it for all this time. So around about April of this year, I said, well, I've been buying hot and heavy for the last year. I was buying a lot of back issues and reading and filling in runs, and I'm like, I got a lot more now. So then I actually contacted Guinness, and they let me update my count, and I had to do some of the same kind of verification, but I didn't have to do the public event for that one. But I updated my count to the official count, which was 94,268. And that was on May 1st of this year. That was my count. And since then, I probably picked up another 1,000 comic books since then. So I think it's fair to say that as of right now, I've got over 95,000 in my collection. So that's the thing. And sure enough, it hit the news today. And I was on the ABC News site. I got on Comic Book Resources, several other sites. The Free Comic Book Day site talked about me. And I've been kind of watching the threads as they go across there, and very, very happy that most of the comments are positive. They're like, oh, that's a cool collection, that kind of thing. Some people ask questions, and a very small amount of troll type of comments that fall into about 3 categories. The standard one that I was expecting to get, which is, hey, I have more comics than that, or I know a guy who has more comics than that. Like, hey, fair enough. You know what? I respond to those. I put the link to the Guinness website, and I say, feel free. Records are made to be broken. I don't expect to hold the record forever. But, and then some of the people respond, oh, I don't want to do all that. And it's like, well, it's kind of easy to say you have, I could say I have 200,000 comics if I don't need to prove it to anybody and actually show some kind of records, and weed out the duplicates. Hell, even being honest, I thought I had over 100,000 when I first went down this path, and even now I'm only at 95,000. So, it's, that's the one comment. It's like, hey, it's fine. I don't have any, it's not a competition, really. I love my comics. I love comics in general. If somebody else has more and they break the record, more power to them. That's great. I love the hobby, and I love that other people would have it. But, the other thing I will say is that I'm a fan. I buy my comics at pretty much retail price, although I'll buy back issues out of quarter and 50-cent and dollar bins a lot of times, right? But I'm not the guy who owns a shop that goes out and buys the collection off of somebody of 20,000 comics for a penny a piece. I think it's fairly easy if your business is buying and selling comics and you're buying huge bulks of comics to amass a tremendous collection, because you could just buy all these collections, and anytime there's a book that's not in yours, you got it for a penny, right? Hey, I'll put it in my collection, and are those people really reading all those comics? Again, people ask very commonly, have you read all those comics? And I'm like, well, kind of, yeah. I've read 90 to 95% of those comic books. I will admit there are some comic books that I get and I kind of flip in, and I'm like, no, and I don't read them. But I will say I flipped through every comic, and I've read the vast majority of the comics that I have.
Yeah, I think that's what a lot of people don't understand, because, I check the comments too, and from those trolls, the attitude was almost like that this was something you set out to do as a young boy. It's like, I'm going to have the biggest collection in the world. And I've known you for a while, And it's just not that. You love comic books so much that you don't throw them out when you're done, like
That's right.
millions of other people.
And I don't want to sell them. I'm not, people ask all the time. It's like, how much is your collection worth? What's your most valuable comic and all that? And it's like it's nice because in the press release that Guinness sent out, they put fragments of the interview with me. So the sites have been picking up these things and they've been quoting me saying, look, it's not about the dollars. I had no intention of selling my comics, so it doesn't matter to me what they're worth. And I think it sends the wrong message to turn these things that I love into these dollar signs.
Right.
But that said, I don't begrudge someone who makes their business out of selling comics. Hey, I like buying comics from them. And if somebody gets joy out of having the most valuable comic collection, right? Hey, you know what? That's great. There's no category that I'm aware of for Guinness for most valuable comic collection. So it'd be cool if somebody who's got all kinds of high grade key books, could, hey, this is valued at $20 million, and get that record or something. Hey, the guy who bought that Action Comics for $3.2 million, he's right in there, right? He owns Metropolis Comics, right? But that's not what I'm about, so I don't look at it that way. Another kind of comment was this one amused me, was because the picture in the articles, one of the pictures that they sent out, I've got all these comics like stacked up on the floor and all around every place. Well, that's visual, because when the photo crew came out, they want something that's visual. If you look at the Guinness book, the guy who has the collection for the most James Bond memorabilia, he's wearing a black tuxedo, and he's got his arms crossed like Bond. Hey, a black tuxedo is kind of cool. If I had the Bond collection, I might put on a black tuxedo. They wanted me to put on a Superman cape and jump around in a costume and stuff because it's visually appealing. And I'm like, no, I don't want to be the fat guy in the superhero T-shirt living in his mom's basement. I want to show, and that's another category of troll comments that I've been getting is, 52-year-old virgin who lives in his mom's basement and never had a woman in that room in his life. Several people that said, like, you know what, I've been married 29 years, I got 2 grown sons, I do all right with the ladies, my wife is great, and even, before my wife and stuff, it's like, as I recall, it was a long time ago, but, it's the kind of thing where I didn't want to perpetuate that. It's kind of like, hey, I have a professional job. I have a master's degree in computer science and a bachelor's degree. I'm not like some ne'er-do-well. No knock against people who don't have this. I'm just saying for me, right, I wanted to say, you know what? I have a life. I have a very rich life. Some people, this guy has no life. Well, no, I have a great life. I have my wife and kids, and the other part of that is, I buy 140 comic books a month now, but I've got a lot more disposable income than when my kids were little. My kids are 20 and 24 years old right now. When my kids were babies and they were 2 years old and 3 years old and 4, they're growing up, I didn't buy this number of comics. When my wife quit work to be a stay-at-home mom to take care of the kids, I cut way back on my comics because the family comes first, right? And fortunately for me, it was the 1990s. So most of the comic books I missed out on were really, really cheap for me to pick up on the aftermarket when my kids were older and in junior high and high school, and I had more disposable income, and I was able to fill in all those Marvel and DC books that I didn't buy in the 90s and read them, and a lot of them fall into that category of, whoa, I didn't really miss that much on this, But, I can appreciate people who grew up on that stuff have a different opinion about it because, the stuff you grow up on when you're a kid, you have a soft spot in your heart for that stuff, right?
Right.
But,
We've talked about that a million times, yeah.
So, I've got that. But anyway, back to that, look how he treats his comics. They're all in piles on the floor. And it's like, well, we staged that. I actually had to pick some of the cooler comics and put them in the front, and I had to pull all these books out and stack them all up. And we spent a long time with that photo crew that was out here, kind of like just setting up the room, and I moved the comic rack from here to there, and I freeze framed a frame from the Superman All-Star Superman Blu-ray on my big screen TV, and I took this thing off the wall over here and stuck it over there. We did all kinds of stuff to make it look really cool, and I think the picture does look really cool. But to those guys, like, obviously I don't leave all my comics laying around on the ground. And they're all bagged and boarded. They're in long boxes. They're very well cared for. And when they were on the ground, they were very well cared for when they were on the ground. It's like my ground is not a dirt hut or something. It's a hardwood floor that is clean, and it's fairly nice in this room. So it was well treated. So don't worry about the condition. And then I'll have my last kind of hater comment, which is, oh, look at this addicted hoarder, sad individual. And I don't. I really don't know how to respond to that. It's just like, hey, I don't cast aspersions on, the guy who loves watching football and wears the jersey from his favorite team and goes to the games and paints a number. Well, maybe the guy who's sitting out there in 5-degree weather with a big number painted on his chest, but, that's a little crazy. But, it's just like, hey, I've got a great life. I've got a great wife and kids. I got a nice house. I got a great job. I don't see how it's sad. And like you know me, Rick, for many years. I mean, anyone who knows me, I don't think I live a sad, bitter existence where I'm just sitting in a room alone with my comics. I got my comics. I don't have any other people.
You generally come off as a person who seems to be very well adjusted, very happy, who's got, a good life, but is actually enjoying himself also, which is, I think, something that people should aspire to be. Whatever it is, whether it's comic books, toys, football, whatever makes you happy, that's what you should do. I mean, you're not, like I said before, you're not into this, doing this to set world records. You're not doing this to make money. You're doing this because you love it, and it shows.
Right. So, and the other one, let's go into some of the more positive, curious questions, which are, a big one was, how do you read 140 or 150 comic books every month? It's like, well, I don't watch that much TV. I don't watch sports pretty much at all. Reading 140 comics, let's say 150, if I read 35 comics to 40, let's say 40 comics a month is 106, 40 comics a week rather is 160 a month. Because I'll read back issues in each month too, and some trade paperbacks and things. So that breaks down to about, 40 comics a week. It's about 7 or 8 comic books a day. It really doesn't, that's an hour and a half, let's say an hour and a half. But I don't read, I read at least 3 or 4 comics every day. But then, so I spend like maybe about 45 minutes. It takes me about 10 minutes to read a comic, usually most comics. But then on a weekend, I'll sit and I'll read 20, 25 comics on Saturday. And I find that if I read them in a row, it goes a little quicker. Kind of get in that groove. But I got my buy. The other question along those lines is, how do you afford all those comics? Well, discount comic book service, fellas. I buy my comics from Discount Comic Book Service. I've been buying from them for 9 years. They're great. I get them in the mail. I get, probably on average about 30 to 40% off cover price. I got my batch just today. This is this week's comics. I get weekly shipping because I get so many. I don't want to get monthly shipping. So, it's a pretty good sized stack of comics here that I get, and I'll kind of fan it out here like a pack of cards. Here's the comic. and I'll have them. I'll have them by and large read by next week. You know, I pretty much keep up on my monthly stuff, but that's, you know, list management, right? If I find that I'm not reading something and I end up having 4 or 5 issues piled up, I'll read it all at once. And then when I read all those 4 or 5 issues in a row, I come to one of two conclusions. I come to the, wow, I shouldn't have been leaving that sit because that was really great. Or I say, I wasn't really missing anything, in which case I will take that off my pull list. You know, so that's not, you know, how do you do it? So, you know, on the website, on comicspectrum.com, there's Bob's pull list. If you look in the section for Bob's blog, I've got a whole bunch of pages there. You can see my comic room. You see behind me here, you can see better pictures and more pictures of it. I've got some pictures of the vault down in the garage where I store all the long boxes. I've got, you know, my Bob's Top Comics where I have like the stuff that are my favorites right now. I got my pull list in there where I've got itemized every month what I order. Since I have to put together, I do a spreadsheet with DCBS, so I kind of pull it all together anyway. I just cut and paste that onto the website. So there's a record for the last year or year and a half that I've been running Comic Spectrum of all the comics that I've bought each month, new comics, right? So again, if anybody doubts, now, how does this guy, well, I'd go in a pretty elaborate amount of fakery if I really wasn't getting all these comic books. With all the reviews that I do on Comic Spectrum and the podcasts that I do and, you know, all the stuff that I document about it and everything like that, is like, wow, that would be an awful lot of effort for arguably not that much fame for being the biggest nerd in existence of having all these comic books.
You're like a supervillain.
Yeah.
Well, actually, one of the questions I wanted to ask you, we've got this little bit of fame that just kind of popped up. On some level, do you worry, security-wise? I mean, I know your house is very secure, but in the back of your mind, are you a little bit concerned that maybe somebody out there wants something that you have?
You know, there's always that possibility. There's lots of the criminal element out there, but, you know, realistically, it's insured, and there's no way somebody is going to steal 95,000 comic books, you know? You know, somebody can steal, maybe they'll come in and grab, you know, but even then, I mean, they can grab up, okay, let me grab these 200 comics that are worth, you know, X amount of dollars. Well, I can rebuy 200 comic books. You know, I have a hard time. I mean, more worrisome for anybody. If my house burned down, you know, it's like, you know, what are you going to do? But, you know, things happen. But I'm not, you know, I've got 340 long boxes. When I moved the last time, I only had about 250 long boxes. And that took an entire big moving van. And, you know, those starving college students, those guys earned their money that day. Loading that van up and move it. I didn't move them myself. Yeah, forget that. I'm going to hire these guys. You know, it's just like, realistically, someone cannot steal all my comics. And if somebody chooses to go in and steal a selection of them, the other thing I'll say is, you know me, since I'm not Mr. Perfect Value Collector, my books are not in the pristine condition that, you know, all these people who want investment grade books and they want perfect comic books and stuff, you know. A lot of my comics fit in from the 60s. They fit in with the stuff that I was reading. I've got them in 4.0, 4.5, 5.0 condition. You know, these are not the primo condition comics that people want. And when I buy them, as a for instance, I just got some comics in the mail today. I'm closing in on having a full run of Green Lantern. I only need 3 more issues now. I just got this one, Green Lantern number 4. I need number 7, number 10, and number, I forget the other one. It's in my list. But I mean, this is probably a 4.0 book. I mean, I paid, I don't know, like $50 for it. It's like it's an awful lot of trouble to steal a $50 book. And then how are you going to sell them? It's like if somebody owns a comic shop or something is going to be doing that. But hell, if somebody robbed my collection, I'd be like out all over the internet saying, this is exactly what was stolen from me. Be on the lookout for someone trying to sell these books. And I have enough reach in the comic book community that, anyone who's actually buying comics is going to probably be able to keep an eye out for, a 4.0 to 5.0 graded collection of all these comics, So, I don't live in fear of something like that.
Yeah, the only reason I brought that up is because somebody had once come into this room, and I know pretty much what I paid for everything in here, but to somebody who walks into it raw, or for instance, somebody that would walk into your room there, they would just be overwhelmed and could not, they just see it like a museum, and that every item is, extremely valuable. And every person that's walked into this room has talked about insurance and theft and how much is it worth, and it's just I don't worry about this. It's like this because this is what makes me comfortable.
Yeah.
I like having this stuff, these reminders of my childhood and my adulthood and my current life, just kind of surrounding me, and just this is my space, my man cave, and I just don't worry about. Of course, catastrophes happen, but again, family first. As long
I
as
do have special collector's insurance. I mean, I don't think that having it as a rider on your homeowner's policy is really going to cover collectibles. So
Mhm.
I collectinsure.com. There's a collectibles insurance agency that specializes in covering collectibles.
Mhm.
That's who I use, and they insure my collection. And again, when I insured my collection with them, they wanted verification. They actually talked to mycomicshop.com that I buy a lot of comics from. They talked to Comics, Tunes, and Toys that, Matt came and helped verify my collection. They talked to DCBS where I buy my, does this guy really have all, all this stuff? We're going to insure this collection. So, and then, all the pictures and stuff. So, it's interesting, but it is insured, so I have that. And the other thing that is funny is someone's like, what was I have them written down here? Let me look. Oh, somebody asked a good one, and it was what percentage is that of the total comics that there are? And I'm like, that's a really good question because I mean I don't have a lot of golden age comics. It's like I have like all the old Marvel and DC, Timely, Atlas, DC, everything that came out before about 1960.
Mhm.
I have very spotty, not that man. I'm starting to get a few here and there, but I hardly have any. I mean, I have a tiny fraction of all the Archie. There's thousands and thousands of Archie comics, Gold Key comics, Dell comics,
Wow.
Charlton comics. There were thousands and thousands of those things, and I don't have any of those. Plus, even today, someone looks at it and says, "Wow, you get 140 comic books a month. You buy everything." I'm like, I'm not even close to buying everything. It's like Marvel and DC, just between the two of them, put out more than 140 comics a month. When you look at all the comics that get published in a month, there's got to be 350, 400 comic books that get published every single month. So right there, I'm falling, if I'm buying like a half to a third of the new stuff that comes out, I'm falling that much farther behind of having every comic ever made each month, right? And again, that's where a shop owner has it on you, right? A shop owner who's getting that stuff, deeply discounted and even more, way more so than I get it. And, they're going to have all that stuff. And, it's there for them to have. Just, a well-stocked store is going to carry all that stuff.
Yeah, but to me, there's a big difference between a collection that's just collected and a collection that's being read. Uh, to me, the only living comic book is a comic book that's been read. Uh, just something that just comes in a box and goes on a pile. It's just a stack of paper in my eyes. The artist, the creators set out to do something, and you are doing what they want you to do. You're reading the book and getting enjoyment out of it. And that's the key.
I love reading them. You know, it's just, but you know, seriously, it's just I have maybe a quarter, maybe a third of all the comics that have been published ever. I'd say there's probably a good 300,000 comics that have been published, at least, maybe 350, 400,000, and more every month. You know, it's just like comics are booming. There's so many comics out there. You know, I mean, and it's just such a rich diversity. And following along from that concept is how do you read all those and keep them straight in your head? And it's like, well, that's a lot of, I think, why I stopped reading so many superhero comics, because there's a certain sameness to all the crossover, you know, Future's End crossover. And I'm not knocking people who like that. You know, it's just like I I have the attitude on comics that any, you know, people, other comments have come across saying, yeah, he has all those comics, but how many good comics does he have? And it's like, well, it really depends on what you consider to be a good comic. You know, some people consider that to be keys that are worth a lot of money. I have a lot of those. They're not worth as much money because they're not in the pristine condition, but I've got them and I've read them. You know, I cracked my Spider-Man #1 out of the CGC slab and read it. I wanted to read my Spider-Man #1, right? Um, but you have all those comics that are out there, and people say, you know, what are about these good comics? When I'm on forums and I talk about new comics, you know, it's like any comic that gets talked about that one person will like, and you know, one person reads it and says, man, this is the best comic I ever read. Some other guy comes on and says, that's the biggest piece of crap that was ever published. And you know, they can't both be right, but actually they both are right because it's just a matter of opinion, you know. And it's like any, almost any. There's probably some comic out there that could probably empirically be said to be a bad comic book, but you know, in general, most comic books, some people are going to like them, some people are not going to like them. They're the exact same comic book. It's just what is appealing to a given person's sensibilities at any point in time, right? You know, I look at, I'm not that enthused anymore about the crossovers, but I'm not knocking those crossovers because there's people who are just getting into comics and they're reading these crossovers. They read Original Sin from Marvel and they read Future's End from DC, and they're like, man, this is awesome. Look at all the crazy concepts that are happening, and look at all, and they are excited by that stuff, and they are turned on by it, and that's great. Me, I read them. It's kind of, you know, I've seen that before. I mean, I can appreciate there's a certain amount of craft that went into it, but it's just not something that turns me on right now. And I would rather read a lot of different kind of comic books. So by reading all the different genres, I'll read a horror books and westerns and sci-fi and post-apocalyptic and, you know, whatever, you know, noir and just superheroes still, and you know, all different kinds of things, and they're all so unique. When I'm reading a lot of these creator-owned books, that it's really pretty easy for me to keep all those storylines straight in my head, because The Walking Dead is nothing like Brian K. Vaughan's Saga, which is nothing like Valiant's Exo Manowar, which is nothing like, you know, Mind Management by Matt Kint, which is nothing like The Massive by Brian Wood. You know, it's just like I could go on. I mean, there's just so many different things that they're so different that you know, I can read 140 books. But what I found was when I was reading almost everything that Marvel put out and almost everything that DC put out, I was having a really hard time keeping it all straight, and it's like I wouldn't remember something that I read last month.
Wow.
Whereas now I find it really easy to remember what I read last month because it was all these different unique cool things.
Yeah, fresh
And
content. I mean,
I
you were
talk
right.
about them all the time on comicspectrum.com, so come and visit me. you know,
Yeah, I mean, just like when you mentioned crossovers, I would have to say that crossovers probably pulled me into collecting, and I'm talking about Avengers versus Defenders, and that
yeah,
was a big
love
deal,
that.
big deal, and I, it was probably one of the earliest crossovers of that scale, and then they didn't do it for a
First issue
while.
of Defenders I ever bought was because of that, because I was reading Avengers,
Mm-hmm. Yep.
and it's great, but it's different. Like now, I kind of make an informed choice about what I do and don't want to read. So now I kind of resent getting pulled into reading it, but that doesn't mean that it's bad. It just means that for me as a reader, it's not a good fit. For someone else, it's pulling them in and having them discover something new that they can then decide whether they like that or not, right? So, there's good and bad to anything. And it's like I look. The other thing, it's like when I do reviews on the site, and the people who do reviews for me on, well, with me, let's say. I mean, I'm a fan site. I don't make any money off this site. No one. I'm not paying anybody. It's like everyone who reviews for Comic Spectrum, they love comics as much as I do. That's why they're doing these things. But when we review a comic book, there's it's really hard for me when I read a review because I edit every review that gets published. And, I find it really hard when some of these people, they'll read a Marvel book or a DC book and say, oh, that was a piece of crap. I'm giving it 1 star, 0 stars. I didn't like it, and it's like, I don't I don't particularly care for that book myself either. But I can look at that book, flip through it, read some pages, and I can see that there's some actual craft that went into putting that book together, right? And there is amateurish work, there is art that, and it's not to say that you won't find this in a Marvel DC book, because you do sometimes, but there's ones where the artist doesn't have a fundamental grasp of anatomy, they don't know anything about perspective or vanishing points, or there's really poor panel-to-panel flow. Maybe there's really muddy colors and it's hard to tell the story. Maybe the writer is like jumping around and is making it very confusing. Those are all valid reasons to critique a comic book. And I try to make sure that when we critique a book, we focus on things like that, not like, I don't like how Punisher was acting, and it's like, well, okay, this other person over here loved how Punisher was acting, so, you're not going to please everybody. Personally, when Rick Remender turned Punisher into Frankenstein and there was this whole Frankencastle, I don't know if you missed that or not. In my opinion, you didn't miss anything because I read a lot of those issues and I thought they weren't my favorite issues, but I can't say that they were intrinsically bad because I know people who read those issues and they loved them. They thought that was the greatest thing that they had ever read, the most unique take on the Punisher. So you can't look at something like that and say, this is intrinsically bad. You can look at it and say, I didn't like that, but that doesn't make it instantly bad. And that's one of my hot buttons is, it's like, since I do love comics, I like to give them a fair shake.
Mm-hmm.
Even if it's something that I don't personally like, there's somebody out there that's going to like it. And if I want to critique something, I want to give something, hopefully, of value about that and not just, I didn't like how Green Lantern's costume was, and it's like, maybe I don't like Green Lantern's costume, but that might be why I stopped buying the book, but it's not going to be why I give that book a rating of 1 out of 5 stars. That's 1 is perfectly fine. Everyone's entitled to opinion. Me empirically saying that this was a terrible, bad, horrible thing because it had something I didn't like, I don't like that.
It,
But no one's perfect. I'm sure I slip and do something like that every now and again.
well, out of your 95,000 books, is there one book that sticks out in your head as just being a horrible book, and then not necessarily for the general public, just you personally, you have this book and you just hate it, but you have.
Absolutely. And I'm not going to name it, but when John Mayo and I were doing the Comic Book Page podcast, which we did for 6 years together, and John's a great guy. He still does the podcast. After I left it, he got some other people that work with him on it. And he does a monthly column on comic book resources where he analyzes sales. Huge, great comic fan, very knowledgeable about Marvel and DC. He does read almost everything that Marvel and DC puts out. Very knowledgeable about both those universes. We used to review one Marvel, one DC, and one indie comic every week. And one week we both read this comic, and I think we gave it a 0. I don't know if we'd ever given a book a 0 before, but it was just the art was muddy as color. It was muddy. It had really terrible anatomy, really no discernible perspective, to it. The panel-to-panel continuity flow was terrible. The story was incredibly superficial. It was ridiculously sexist. It was just, we could find there was no socially redeeming characteristic to this comic book at all. And it was the only book that we ever both agreed that this was just a terrible comic book. But maybe there's somebody out there that read it and said, this spoke to me, I really approve of treating women like this. And, it's like, well, okay, that wasn't us. But, on other books, like we would both read the same comic, and one of us would give it a 2-star and the other one would give it a 5-star, and we read the same exact comic, and we both have similar, 40-year histories or 30-year history for him. He's 10 years younger than me, of reading comics and stuff. It's just, different comics are going to hit different people, which is why I think it's important to try lots of different things, because there's so many different comics out there. And it's not just superhero comics, it's not just indie comics, it's just there's all different kinds of stuff, and there's something out there for everybody in comics.
You're absolutely right. And I think one of our mission statements on this show is to make people aware of that. Yes, we both got our start, with the superhero books, but we've also grown up and matured and expanded our horizons. And I recently gave somebody a copy of Strangers in Paradise.
Excellent book.
And, because it was a perfect book for somebody who's not really into comics but wants to see something different. So that was my good deed for that day.
One that I will say that I thought was one of the best original graphic novels that I read in the last year was March, Volume 1. It's by Congressman John Lewis, with art by Nate Powell, and it's about the Civil Rights March at the Edmund Pettit's Bridge. They didn't make it up to that. There's going to be a Volume 2 and maybe even a Volume 3, but it's all about Congressman John Lewis. He was there. He knew Martin Luther King. And, they're talking about the lunch counter sit-ins and stuff, and he was there. And it was wonderfully told. It was moving. It was absolutely fabulous. I gave this book a 5 out of 5. I raved about the book when I reviewed it on Comic Spectrum. It's just, I cannot highly enough recommend March. And again, it's nothing at all. It's so far removed from Batman, that it's not even funny. But they're both comics,
Mm-hmm. So congratulations.
All I got for Eric.
Congratulations on your record. I am so proud of you. What does the future hold? I mean, you're just going to keep buying comics. I know that.
Keep buying comics, keep reading comics, keep reviewing comics. I hope that I want people to come and check out Comic Spectrum. I want them to like the Facebook page. I want them to come visit the site. And it's not like a lot of other sites for a lot of reasons, but one that I'll just stress. I don't want you to like my site because that click is going to earn me ad revenue. When you get right down to it, most sites out there want you to like them because they have ads and they're getting revenue off of you liking them. I don't take ads. I've had people come to me and ask me if I'll take ads. I don't do ads. You know, I've had people come and say, hey, can I pay you to endorse this comic book? No. I'll read your comic book, and if I like it, I'll write a good review on it. And if I don't like it, I won't. You know, but I won't take money for doing that. I have my site, and all the people who write reviews for my site, we do it because we love comics and we want to expose more different kinds of comics to as many people as possible. So I see every new like as somebody that I can help them be informed along the path to loving comics the way you and I love comics.
I like that. The Comic Spectrum, we're here to help.
That's right.
That's your new tagline. Okay, before we go, I always like to pull little tchotchkes that I have around here, and I don't know if you knew this about me, but I'm a huge Batmobile fan, and I recently joined the, I don't know, Batmobile of the Month Club. So every month I get 2 Batmobiles, and here's one of them. I don't know if you can see it.
Are those the ones from Eagle Moss?
Yes, it is. And here's one
Those
of my...
are awesome. I see them at the comic shop.
Yeah, yeah. They're high quality, die cast, displayable, collectible, and I just love them because I try to, as I'm getting older, I'm getting less and less interested in the whole universe of what we live in. So I'm trying to condense everything down, and I've focused a lot of my energy on the Batmobile and some comics. And yeah, I just love getting that box once a month and opening it up. I'm like a kid at Christmas. So check it out, Batmobilia.
I got some of the older ones that I think these are kind of recasts. They weren't as nice as those because they didn't have the little plastic. You probably saw them. They were a little smaller.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it seemed like they were just, these are scaled up from the same molds, maybe.
Right.
I forget who made them.
I believe Corgi. I've got
yellow and blue Corgi, maybe, right?
Yep.
They were like yellow and blue carded.
Mm-hmm.
And there were a lot of the same ones, and I have most of those, and they're really cool.
Yeah.
You have that Lego Batmobile?
Mm-hmm.
You have the Lego Batmobile?
Yes, I do.
Can you build it?
It's way back there. We'll take a tour on another day, but yeah.
I've got one too. My kids got it for me for Christmas a couple of years, and we built it together.
That we did the same thing. I saw it somewhere, bought it for them for Christmas, and that was, we spent, a couple of days, a couple of hours each night after homework, of course, and put it together, and it's a centerpiece of the Batmobile collection. I really, really dig it. I also have a huge one back here. I don't know if you can see it.
Yeah, we can see it.
Yeah, that one, my action figure is going to go in that. But again, congratulations. We're going to wrap this up because it is getting late, and you did want to get out of here early. So,
yeah. So much for our ability to do the half-hour episode. Sorry, guys.
It's all right. It's still fun-sized. I didn't say it was short. So everybody go to comicspectrum.com. Check it out. By all means, check out the reviews. It's your one-stop shop to learn everything about comics from the ground up. If you've been collecting all your life, or if you're just starting, this is a good jumping-off point. You'll learn a lot, and hopefully you'll be seeing some content from me. I'm in the middle of something for you.
I need to get some back-issue reviews of romance comics from you, and some collected edition reviews, and the stuff that you do. Because we've got a place for all that stuff on Comic Spectrum.
Yes, I'm a couple of hundred words into my latest article, so you'll be hearing from me shortly.
We have, just to let people know, we do new comics from all publishers. We do digital comics, digital-only comics. We do web comics.
Mm-hmm.
We do manga. I've got a couple of guys who read manga, and they specialize in reviewing manga. I get anime reviews every now and again from some people that like anime and go to Anime Expo, and they're real hardcore anime guys. I get one of those is my son Greg, um, and writes some great reviews on animes. So we try to, and then we also have back issue and collected edition reviews. So we cover, if it's comicsy, we cover it.
Yeah, and we're going to add a new category, and that's video games, because I just got a new PlayStation 4.
I have a video game. I built a gaming page that I never filled out because I'm not really into it, and unless I have somebody that's going to contribute content, it's just kind of pointless for me to run that part of the thing, because I don't want to have something. Same, my movie reviews are the same way. I used to have a guy who wrote really great movie reviews, then he kind of got burned out on it and stopped doing it, so I haven't put up hardly any movie reviews in the last year. So it's just like some of these things that are, they're not my bag.
Mm-hmm.
I need to have people who are as passionate as I am about some of these things so that I can get kind of regular content, because that's the thing where I make sure every day there's a new comic book review up on a site every single day, at least one. I put a comic book review up, and then I'll usually have something else. So I'll put up a comic book review in the morning, and then I'll put up a review of a crowdsourcing campaign or a manga or an anime or a collected edition or something else in the evening. So I try to keep it so that there's something new for people to look at every day.
Okay.
If there's not something new, people just they forget about the site. You want to make it a destination. Go there. If you go there every day, there's something for you. If you go there a couple of times a week, you can look at a few things, when you're there. So, anyway.
All right, my friend.
For the accolades, and I'll see you around on Facebook.
Yeah. Oh, you're going to message me with that horrible comic that you told me about.
Yeah.
I have an idea what it is, but I just need you to know.
Well, that one you'll have to go to the comic book page website. So that's www.comicbookpage.com. That's John Mayo's site. And look back in the archives from before I left the show. So that would have been May of 2013. So it was probably in 2011 or 2012, maybe.
Okay.
So
do that.
It was an indie book.
All right, my friend. Congratulations again. Oliver Queen congratulates you.
All right, Ollie.
And thanks to everybody for tuning in. And we will see you again very soon, next week.
All right. Bye, everyone.